This episode of The Patrick Coffin Show is brought to you by an upcoming pilgrimage to Italy to which you are invited. Go to patrickcoffin.media/Italy to find out more information about our spiritual director, Father David Genuine from the Diocese of Santa Rosa. You'll find out where we're going. I'll give you a very quick preview. We land in Rome on the 3rd of April. We drive straight to Assisi. Spend a day in Assisi learning about St. Francis, and that becomes our base of operations to spend a day in Siena. We learned about St. Catherine of Siena and see her relics there and see the beautiful churches and amazing food, wine, and architecture. Back to Assisi, and then we have another excursion to Orvieto, which is the place of the miracle, a Eucharistic miracle that forms the basis of the Feast of Corpus Christi. More wine, more food from Tuscany, and more Catholic faith experiences. Then we drive south to Rome. Now, Rome is the main that's the main destination for this pilgrimage. We spend the rest of the days of the pilgrimage up until the 12th in Rome. We will see a papal audience on that Wednesday with the Holy Father, Pope Francis. We're going to be at St. Peter's Church on Divine Mercy Sunday for 12 o'clock Mass. That is going to be a grace and a half alone. We're going to see the 4 major basilicas. It's going to be a real time of prayer and fun and friendship and growth in our relationship with Jesus Christ and with each other. So go to patrickcoffin.media/Italy and sign up today. If you do so before November 3rd, you save $100 per person. So looking forward to seeing you there, and sign up now. Don't postpone, don't delay, don't pay the procrastination tax. So now we're going to be talking about an amazing topic with a superstar African leader in the pro-life movement and beyond. Her name is Obianuju Ekeocha, and I know you're going to love her. And now, this episode of The Patrick Coffin Show. Welcome to the show where we go upstream to culture, away from politics. Our next guest is Obianuju Ekeocha, Uju for short. She is a African-born leader and writer and strategist. And I first heard of Uju because of her articulate open letter to Melinda Gates, about which we'll speak. She was born in Southeast Nigeria. She's the founder and president of Culture of Life Africa, and she's spoken in 15 different countries. She's been on all the major media platforms, including the BBC, Ave Maria, EWTN, and now the pinnacle, the Mount Everest of platforms, The Patrick Coffin Show. She joins us now from the UK. Hey, Uju, great to see you again.
Hey, Patrick, I'm so pleased to be here, and you really got it right. This is the pinnacle. I'm so excited to be on your show today.
You will be handsomely paid per our agreement. So we're starting to share show guests. We've both been on Andrew Clavin's fine show, and every time I go and do some research on you, you're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Your platform is just no. I don't mean you. I mean your.
Because I'm dieting, you see.
Can we start again? We'll start again. Your platform is increasing, and your influence is certainly broader and broader and broader. I understand. Before we do anything else, you're writing a book for Ignatius Press, and it's called Target Africa. What's it about?
Now, it is going to be about neocolonialism, which, of course, I'm hoping we're going to talk about in our discussion today. But neocolonialism is an issue that I have been speaking about for a while, even in a very non-specific way. But in the last 2 years, I think I've kind of started zeroing in on this term to flesh it out a bit, because even some of us are still trying to kind of understand. We understand what it is, but we're trying to unfold it, to know exactly all the dimensions of what this thing, neocolonialism, or this term neocolonialism is. So the book will be all about neocolonialism, but I am writing along the axis of the life issues, the marriage issue, the LGBT issue. So all the hot button issues, especially as it pertains to Africa, but also in relation to the Western countries.
Well, since neo means new, let's start with what colonialism is, because this is a kind of the sub-theme. I'm still officially a subject of the British Crown. Canada's part of the Commonwealth, and so we were a colony or a dominion of Canada until 1949, and then 1982. Pierre Elliott Trudeau signed Canadian independence, so there was no bloodshed. They just sat down for tea in Ottawa. But my experience as a Canadian part of the British Empire, as a sort of a quote colony, is probably rather different from African countries who were under either France or Holland or England. But it's we now think of colonialism or the new version as all bad. It's just all bad. It just brought pain and suffering, and it imposed cultural values. But did it also bring order and a sense of law and democratic structures and science and hospitals? Oh, and the gospel of Jesus Christ. So how do you understand colonialism?
Okay,
is there a redeemed way of thinking of it?
Right. Now, actually, Patrick, you are one of the few people who I've spoken to that actually understand a bit of what colonialism is. And I think it's simply because of the fact that you come from Canada and you have really been a part of a British colony, in a sense of speaking. So colonialism is so different, and you have just alluded to the way in which it is different from slavery. Because I think if any of your viewers are American, anybody would know that even up to today, there are all these tensions between the African Americans, and the rest of America, because there is still some sort of grievance for slavery. And of course, we're talking about statues, we're talking about a Confederate flag, we're going all the way back to the generals and the Confederacy and all whatnot. So slavery is completely different in the sense that it brought very obvious pain and of course the loss of freedom. There was all the horrible things that were involved in the system of slavery. But colonialism is completely different, because believe it or not, if you go to any African country and you speak to the average person, there is honestly no animosity or rancor or grief in the mind of an African towards the colonial masters, as they would call it. My parents would say the colonial masters. So people like my parents, who were born into colonialism, my dad was born in the 1930s, my mom was born in the 1940s, and they were really children of the colonial days. They were born into this system, and they lived within that system until our independence, which wasn't until the 1960s. So all through their childhood, all through their young adult years, they were living in the colonial, sort of under the colonial rule. And today, my parents are in their 70s. My dad is in his 80s. And the whole time growing up, my parents never really, I never got this sense that there was bitterness towards the British. On the contrary, my dad would speak of the British so fondly. My mom would speak of the British so fondly. My mom was from the Anglican background, so even she had more of an endearment, towards the Church of England and the Anglican Church, even though now she's a Catholic. But we've come out of that, and we are grateful for all the things. Of course, we are regretful that it had to come to that. So, of course, now, in retrospect, people who lived in colonialism, I want to believe, in many ways, are grateful for the independence. So we all African countries celebrate our independence. But also, there is some sort of vestige of gratitude for the things that came in the days of colonialism, like the faith. The gospel of Jesus Christ, where I come from, is 100% Christianized. My uncle, who was the last pagan in our village, my uncle was a pagan priest, got baptized about 7 years ago, and with his baptism, the work was finished. The work of the colonials and the work of the missionaries, more like, had been completely done. So if people were so bitter towards the colonial masters or the colonial fathers, then we would have rejected the gospel by now. But everybody knows that the church is growing in Africa now. We are sending our priests, our vocations are so many, and our bishops are amazing, and the church is vibrant. So it is really, that's what colonialism was, but we look back at it and we don't want to be colonized again. So talking of neo-colonialism, it's like in broad daylight, we are seeing people from these same countries that colonized us before. But in addition to those, so in addition to Great Britain, in addition to France, in addition to Portugal and Spain, we are seeing countries like the United States and Canada, Sweden, Finland, these wealthier countries, Norway, the Netherlands, these countries are coming back, and they are trying to step in in such a way through the humanitarian aid and through the kind of assistance to Africa. They are becoming larger figures on the continent of Africa. They are becoming decision makers. They are determining in so many ways the progress and success of the African people, but in also an insidious way, they are bringing parts of cultures that would be diametrically opposed to ours. You know, they're bringing issues that have been rejected by the African people, that the African people find, you know, kind of objectionable, things like contraception, things like abortion, the way they are bringing in the so-called comprehensive sexuality education. Some of the things they're bringing in, it's very objectionable to the people, but we are in a difficult position as African nations are, because we already have like a financial relationship with these people, and we have a dependency, unfortunately, on these countries, and that's making our lives difficult.
Uju, I am loath to stop you speaking because it's all golden content, but I think you really just nailed what neocolonialism is, and that is the financially based hegemony caused by debt and all the strings that are attached to African countries that are trying to get on their own 2 feet, trying to stop being in any way dependent upon foreign aid. And they find that when governments apply to countries like the United States or first world European countries, it's tied to abortion and contraception. So which is worse, the old colonialism that brought the British Empire to Africa, or the neo-colonialism, which is bringing all manner of first world cultural toxicity. So it's an irony, isn't it, that the neo-colonialism, which is thought to be bad, is being practiced by the countries that think that they're immune to it because of their well-meaning nature, I suppose, or their motives.
Yeah, absolutely. They say that their intentions are very good, but honestly, Patrick, if anyone would just stand back to take a look at the bigger picture, you would see that there is a lot of lies involved. There is a lot of political maneuver. I would also want to point out that a lot of these things are coming sort of from not just the Western countries, but it's coming from the Western left ideology, you know, the leftist ideology and sort of a very radical liberal ideology that has already been completely formed in the Western countries, and they are bringing it and they're offering it to Africa. But also, it's not just offering it so we can choose. Even when the African countries refuse to choose, then they put a lot of pressure and they make sure they undermine whatever it is that you're doing if you're not choosing that. So I'll give you an example. During the AIDS pandemic, I mean, we're still in the AIDS pandemic, but towards the beginning of the AIDS pandemic, a lot of the African countries were affected and struck by it. It was awful. We had this disease that we didn't have any cure for. And there were all these nations who were wondering what to do. People were dying. A lot of their young people were dying in the population. And the different countries were offered the condom approach. So huge condom campaigns were being done, starting all the way from the United Nations. It was coming from different institutions from the Western countries. But one particular president stood out in Africa, and that was President Museveni, who is the president of Uganda. And he looked at the condom and he said, I don't want this to be what my people's lives would depend on. Let us go back and develop something. He got his own team together. They developed the so-called ABC program, which was very reliant on abstinence and being faithful. And then, say, for example, for sex workers in their population, they will offer the condoms. But the condoms were supposed to be like a really last option, if that, right? So
for a small sliver of the population, because people want to use that as the fulcrum. Right, to sell to everybody.
Exactly. But they were offering it for children, for school, for people in schools. They were offering it the way they were offering the condoms to couples. So it was the president of Uganda rejected it. He was very, very open and very bold to say, we will not accept this. This is not going to be our project. So he and his wife, the first lady, they launched this countrywide, what they were calling the zero grazing campaign. So it was very, sort of a well government supported project where they were going into every part of the country. They were preaching this. They were preaching abstinence. They were preaching chastity. They were preaching being faithful. They were preaching monogamy to people in the villages. And within a space of 10 years, I think it was, they had such a decrease in the HIV infection rates, to the point that up to this day, I am a scientist. If you read through any scientific journals, if you're going through records, you would see that Uganda is the country that has had the most dramatic drop in HIV infection. So by 2008, they had, they went from being 30% in the 80s to 30% of the young people infected to 6%. So this was such a drastic technique that they had put in place. And then what happened after 2010? They were completely sabotaged. From the United Nations, everybody was attacking them. Uganda started getting a lot of allocations for condoms. They were bringing in so much condoms. And again, what is happening is that the government has completely abandoned the abstinence projects. And I was in Uganda last year, and there were all these massive billboards of condoms all along the street. So they had such an attack and such a pushback. And this is really what happens within neocolonialism, that they come offering us something and they say it's for our own good. But when we decide to choose something else and we say within our culture, within our, our way of life, we can find a better approach, they always then undermine it.
And is what did the Ugandan government abandon the program despite the data that shows how successful it was because of the almighty dollar? Was it financially undermined? They just couldn't resist.
Over time, you see, what happened was that even the abstinence projects need funding. So all those projects gradually got defunded. It's not that the government is against abstinence or the government has come against abstinence, but they kind of got weary. They kept fighting. Every time the president went to the United Nations, somebody would read a speech, somebody would say something. They would try to mock the technique. People were always bringing it up as if he was doing something that was killing the people, or as if he was putting the populations at risk.
Right.
And I think they just honestly got weary. And of course, there was a lot of money involved. So many people were going to gain from the condom projects, and the condom people were saying, if you still want, let's still have abstinence there, and then but let there be condom. But of course, the two cannot exist in the same space.
Sure.
And now they found that out, because all over the country, on the road to Entebbe Airport, I saw these massive billboards, and the billboards were paid for by USAID during the Obama campaign, because I saw all the logos there. So it's really, really unfortunate. It's very painful, because the African people keep getting a lot of pressure that we don't deserve. And we already have our problems. So it's not all that easy for our government officials and our leaders to keep fighting against so much money. And I'm talking millions of dollars. We just don't have the resources to fight those.
What was your reaction to President Trump signing away the Mexico City policy and cutting off all of that relationship?
Yeah, I wrote an article about it, and anybody can see on YouTube if you could find a very short video. I did a 4-minute video called "The Dictatorship of the Wealthy Donor." I talked about that, and I talked about the reaction to it. We were all very pleased. A lot of the pro-life people across the continent of Africa were very pleased, were very grateful, and even the ordinary people. When you tell them, look at what has happened. President Trump has defunded the abortion organizations in Africa. What do you have to say? The one question they always asked would be, was America funding abortion in Africa before?
Right.
Was America funding abortion organizations in Africa? So it even though, yes, he defunded these organizations that were providing abortion and that were lobbying for abortion laws in Africa, that was really, really good, and we're grateful for it. But the very revealing thing that happened, what was most revelatory after he reinstated the Mexico City policy, was that the Obama administration's boldness, really, and audacity in bringing to us, in funding abortion organizations in Africa, was kept very much under wraps, and people did not know. A lot of people didn't know. So after all, if it was something so good, why keep it a secret? So
Right.
it really, the past 8 years has been like a secret. We knew, because we've been following these organizations. We knew that on Obama's day one in office in 2009, it was January 2009, he completely repealed and rescinded the Mexico City policy. So that had been a problem that we had been talking about, that nobody would believe you. But of course, now that Trump has defunded it, we are very grateful, but also there is a lot of fight back. And that's what the video is all about. There's a lot of fight back.
And of course, law is one sphere. It's one front in the battle. I watched your talk at the Rose Dinner for Campaign Life. And I too was very moved by Hotel Rwanda, the film starring Don Cheadle. And you rightly point out the role of the media in silencing certain events and promoting other events. So people who've seen the film may not have realized. I think a lot of people found out about the Ugandan massacre because of the film. Rwandan massacre. Yeah.
Yeah, because of the film, a lot of us didn't actually know. And as I had said it during the Rose Dinner in Canada last year, it was, I was in Africa then. I was a teenager, but in school they used to tell us things. They taught us different things. I went to really fantastic schools. Our teachers were well informed, but nobody told us about Rwandan genocide. So how is it that we never found out? How is it that I never heard about it? Not that I never once heard about it, but we just didn't know how bad it was until, of course, I became an adult and started looking at these things for myself and seeing it for myself. But that is exactly, I think, what is happening with abortion and issues like that are being well hidden, not talked about at all. And even when it's talked about, people are glorifying the people who are bringing abortion. Planned Parenthood and all these organizations. So I think this is going to be someone's story someday, that we never knew abortion was this bad.
Which tribe are you from?
I'm Igbo.
Igbo. Is the language called Igbo? What's the language? Your mother tongue?
That's it, the Igbo language.
What's the word in the Igbo language for a birth control pill? Is there one?
No.
So there's no linguistic way. Of course, language, culture is upstream from everything, including language. It probably, you've made this point so many times, Uju. I hope people are listening. The African mind, it doesn't compute. No birth baby pill? What? Because that's not what Africans do not, and we're not talking about, conservative, right, Christian Africans. We mean like your uncle, the pagan. I love the way you just call him the pagan priest. But traditional African society is inherently pro-life and pro-family. Am I true?
Absolutely right, Patrick. And this, seriously speaking, I laugh about it when you ask me, what do people call contraception? And let no one think it's because we're so naive. The Africans are so naive that, maybe this is why someone has to come. Someone like Melinda Gates has to come in to tell them about this pill or that device or that drug, to stop them from having children, or to help, as I say, help them space children. Let me tell you something, that in my culture, actually, people don't like it when a woman has a baby 1 year after the next. You see what I mean? So, for example, when I was growing up, there was someone who got pregnant and she had a baby the year before, and then she was having a baby 11 months later.
Yeah. Irish twins.
People frown at that. People frown at that and say, can't you space your baby? So it's not like the concept of a healthy spacing of children is strange to us. My mom always told me that she felt 2 years was a good enough time. And when she got married, she felt, well, I think I will space my babies 2 years apart, so that, for different things, for school, for this, for that, it's not too far apart. It's not. And let me tell you how my mom had her babies. She didn't have Melinda Gates to help her space her children. My mom had a baby in 65. My mom had a baby in 67. She had a baby in 69, 71, 73. You can do the math. And the same thing happened to my grandmother. Then my mom had a baby in 76. 76, then she had a baby in 80. So she knew she wants, she's open to life, but she wanted to have the 2-year spacing. She wasn't using contraception. So the idea of spacing children, it's actually quite acceptable. Is actually quite common and so well practiced. A lot of families have 2-year gaps between their children. Some people have 3-year gaps between their children. My grandmother was having babies in the 30s and 40s, and none of, all my uncles and aunties are spaced. So no one was born the year after the next. And my grandmother lived, to really to her 90s, and she lived a healthy lifestyle. So I don't understand this insult that they keep putting, towards us, and this, how they look down on us, the condescension with which they view Africans.
Yeah, that's the patronizing thing.
Exactly. It's why do you look down on us? We are not stupid. People know about spacing of children. Even traditionally, people understand it, and they understand that there are times in a woman's cycle that she is fertile. People understand that. We don't need Melinda Gates to come in and tell us that. We certainly don't need them to come in and give us contraceptives that would hurt. Even now, my mom is in her 70s, and whenever I talk to her about contraception, or she wants to know what I'm doing, and then I'm trying to explain to her, my mom is quite well educated. She was a teacher the whole time we were growing up. She's now retired, and she just wonders, it's so poisonous. She knows. My mother knows that it's so dangerous. Why would anybody want to carry a copper wire in their body? Why would anybody want to take these drugs that you don't even know what they're going to do in your body? And, they know that and they understand that. So why are they bringing it to us?
People often describe America as a diverse society, which it is. And there's a slogan out there, which I don't believe is true, but it sounds good because it fits on a bumper sticker. Diversity is our strength. Well, I'm sorry. Diversity is a fact. It's a neutral fact. But it alone, strong people are your strength, and good principles, those are strong things.
Absolutely,
so people don't realize that any one African country is itself a patchwork of different dialects, different cultures, different ways of. But I think this neo-colonialism is powered by the premise that Africa is one. It's the only continent that we call the dark continent, right? As though it's a monolith of one kind of people. Totally the opposite's the truth, right?
Absolutely. In Africa, we have almost 3,000 countries. We have thousands of tribes. Even in Nigeria alone, we have more than 20 tribes. I come from one of the 3 major tribes, but there are so many other tribes, the Efiks, the Ibibios, there are the Yorubas, the Urobos, the Shakiris. We are so many, and we speak different languages, completely, not even related, not like you have people in Scotland speaking English with a different accent. They speak completely different languages. And there is so much diversity in Africa that we don't have to come up with silly terms and silly bumper sticker statements like diversity is our strength, because we just wake up and it's a diverse culture already.
Right.
Even within Nigeria, it is a diverse culture. We dress different, we eat different completely different things. So we're different. But then the neo-colonial masters, who are now, some of the Western nation leaders, some of the private foundations and philanthropic organizations, some of the international agencies, they treat Africa like we are one village, and they bring us the one size fits all, and they're taking advantage of the upper hand that they have with regards to wealth, wealth and money.
As a faithful Catholic, is it disheartening when you hear of left-leaning Western European prelates kind of sharing in this condescension toward Africa? There's almost like, well, the Africans are so nice, they're so cute, pat them on the head, but ignore their message. And then I'm friends with Cardinal Arinze. We hope to meet with him in Rome. He himself, as you may know, was baptized by a saint, Blessed Michael Tanzi.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think there's an undervaluing of the strength of the Catholic Church in Africa. People are not aware that this is a sleeping giant. So how do you react when certain cardinals say things that want to jettison or isolate African church leaders?
Oh, well, Patrick, you really want to get me started, don't you? Now, 2 years ago was when the first synod on the family
Yes.
happened in Rome, and I think that was really the first time everyone sat up because it became obvious that the African fathers, the African Synod fathers, had to stand up and speak up. And I think for the first time, everybody took note because before then, I think it had only been really Cardinal Arinza that we would hear who would say these amazing pro-life things, but people didn't really understand because it seemed as if at the time there was no need for it. The church
Yeah.
was the church was the church. And we had one teaching, even while I was growing up in Africa, even in my parish in Africa, we understood, marriage is between one man, one woman, even in my culture where we had years ago before the missionaries did their successful work, we had accepted polygamy as part of our culture, but of course when the church came and started excommunicating people actively and started teaching people that we love you and we want you all in the church, but if you want to be able to completely be in communion with the church, you have to understand what marriage is. You have to understand what human sexuality is and the dignity, and know that you cannot be with two wives at the same time. So we took those sort of strong steps, if you see what I mean. There was a non-compromising position that the church always had, and that's how I knew the church. And the church was very loving, but also the church would never compromise the gospel of Jesus Christ. So when the synod happened, everything came to light, and the world watched as the whole thing happened. The world watched as, of course, some cardinals said this and that and the other about the Africans and how we cannot do what the Africans want. At the time, I had written an article, which of course is easily, you can find it easily. I think it's something like, the heading was something like, an African woman's open letter to a synod father or something like that. So
is that on your website? Is that on Culture of Life, cultureofafrica.com?
Even Alitaya had published it. So that it is on cultureoflifeafrica.com, somewhere buried. But I think Alitaya had published it, and I'm going to send you a link immediately after, so we can put it in the show notes.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. So I wept. I wept when I heard that, because when it was obvious that our synod fathers were coming against real opposition, it was unbelievable. There were these people who were proposing things that were against the church, against the gospel, against what we always knew. I went to Rome, Patrick. I went to Rome. I had no plans. I just said, I'm going to go to Rome. I knew some of the synod fathers personally, and I said, I'm going to do a dinner. I'll bring them and sit them with some of my pro-life friends. I had all these pro-life friends who were living in Rome or who had been in Rome at the time. So during that synod in 2014, I went out to Rome and I did a small dinner party with 18 people. I had 2 synod fathers there. The following year, it was even more obvious that there were all these lobbyists and all these groups that it was unbelievable. They were all heading towards Rome, and they were all, wanting to get the Europe, some of the Western synod fathers to speak up for them and take stances that were really against church teachings. I went to Rome again, this time with a little more notice. I had 7 synod fathers, and I had up to 20 people who were like pro-life leaders from different parts of the world. And we had an amazing dinner meeting. It was really amazing. And of course, our synod fathers were strengthened. They asked us different questions. We asked them different questions. So the following week, they went out during the synod, and of course did as well as we would expect them to. So it's quite painful. And anybody who would read the article I wrote during, when a European cardinal had spoken against the synod fathers from Africa, anybody who would read that would understand where I'm coming from, that the church is one, the church is universal. Someone like my mom is in a village, she's far, far away in our village, in a small parish where nobody is wealthy. Women are coming to church some of them without shoes, and they are happy in Christ, and they are all of them praying for the church, all of them praying for the same Holy Father that we pray for. All of of them praying for Rome. This is the same church, but these women are making the same sacrifices because they are the ones who are saying no to polygamy. Their husbands are the ones saying no to polygamy. They are the ones trying to follow the gospel.
Yeah.
It's not always easy, but they are still doing it. So why is it that some wealthy Western, bishop or cardinal will come out because they get money from the government, or they get taxes from the tax exemptions from the government, and then they come in and they speak for like the LGBT lobby? Why should that be?
I wanted to ask you about that. The average traditional African, irrespective of which country, will invariably have a natural revulsion to homosexual behavior, right? The LGBT agenda is oil and water to the extreme. Am I misreading the cards? That there's a natural cultural rejection of the lifestyle, not of the people, as in the case of polygamists. No one ever judged or finger pointed at polygamy. But while the church wants to enculturate maximally, there are limits. There are limits, and when it touches upon the moral law, then you have to pick.
Absolutely, we have to pick for the sake of the gospel. I will get to the LGBT issue just in 1 second. I had remembered something that when I was growing up, I was only about 7 or 8 years old, and there was this really amazing man in our parish. He was really, really good. He was a lecturer just like my dad, and he was very active in the church. But I noticed that he didn't used to receive communion. It was we were from like a family parish, very small parish. Everybody knew everybody because all of us were children of people working in the same place, if you see what I mean. So our parents were teaching at a university or kind of a college of education.
Yep.
So a lot of the people in our church were members of that academic community. So I always remembered that this man did not receive communion the whole time, every Sunday. So one day I asked my mom, why doesn't he receive communion? And actually this man is actually the father of my friend. So I was friends with one of the daughters. We were in secondary school together, so I knew the family really well. And definitely her father was so much more active in the parish than my dad. So I kept wondering, why doesn't he receive communion? And my mom told me, at the age of 7, my mom said, well, that's because he has 2 wives. He has his wife who is here. Then he has another wife in the village because his mother had married this person for him. So very complicated situation, really. And then he ended up with 2 wives. He was a well-educated man. He was exactly the same age as my dad, just exactly the same age as my dad. And his children were my friends. So I knew them. I knew their home. And they seemed like a very ordinary family. But I tell you that even with all of this, he could not receive communion as long as he was in this relationship. That's how clear it is in Africa.
Yeah, and so he accepted it. He didn't go and hold a placard. He accepted it.
Exactly. You don't lobby. You don't go to Rome and try to get an exemption for yourself because you found yourself in this situation. You don't lobby it. Our parish priest eventually became the bishop and then the archbishop of our diocese, thank God. And even then he made no exemptions for this man. It was very clear. What you are to do is I know a reverend sister whose daddy has 2 wives. His dad came for her final profession, could not receive communion because he had 2 wives. And yet some cardinal from Europe, I was listening to one of the interviews, and one of the cardinals from Europe said, oh, you see all these women who were married, and divorced, and they're married again or whatever. And then they come to church for first Holy Communion for the children, and they can't receive communion. And that's a shame, he said, in his wonderful German accent. He said, oh, that's a shame. And I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute. There are priests and reverend sisters that I know whose parents are polygamists, and they come in for their ordination and their final profession in the case of the religious sisters, and they can't receive communion. And it's so clear, and they humbly accept it. And they don't love God any less, but the church doesn't love them any less, but that's it. Anyway, let's talk about
different mindset. The LGBT thing,
Yeah.
and also want to get to Boko Haram and whether or not you've found support from Muslims with the work in the Culture of Life Africa. But go ahead. We got a few minutes left.
Oh, okay, gosh.
Yeah.
So I have to be quick. So the LGBT issue is one that by culture, we find it reprehensible. It is rejected as a sexual behavior. And that can easily be seen from a Pew Research survey that I will send to you, that even on things like abortion, many of the African countries stay above 80% rejecting abortion. So people in the population would say, 80%, 82, 88. In Ghana, 92% would reject abortion under any circumstance. But homosexuality, everybody stayed above 90. So this is 90% of almost any country that you will poll in Africa. I've seen also another poll from an organization called the Ipsos. They're like a marketing company. They did a survey in Kenya some years ago. It was in the 90, it was in the 90 percentile as well. So it's one that unifies everybody. At the United Nations, I go to the UN once a year, and I spend about a week there fighting and doing things for life. And we find that most of the African ambassadors and African negotiators will always, without exemption, fight to keep away LGBT issues, what they call the SOGI issues, sexual orientation and gender identity, out from documents. So we always can rely on them to do that, because that is one issue where they are not ready to back down. Now, talking about the people who have like homosexual tendencies or same-sex attraction, I just want people to understand one thing, because the Africans have been demonized on this issue. Every time you hear BBC talking about it, or CNN, or any of these agencies or news organizations, they always try to cast all Africans as homophobes, since we are coming up 90-something% against the homosexual lifestyle. But I just want people to understand the one thing, that these same-sex attracted people are our children, they are our brothers and sisters, and you cannot love them more than us. These people are loved, they know and understand they are loved, except in cases where they start listening to LGBT organizations, very, very powerful lobbying organizations from DC and other places. Once they start doing that, then those people alienate them from their community, from their families. Some of them have gone away from their families, and they are living these lives that are completely ostracized and isolated. But what is actually strengthening them are the Western LGBT organizations, who are trying to make them feel that they are victimized in their own country, in their own communities. And I think that is very wrong. And the Africans are not homophobes. Sometimes people, you find that mobs do different things, and people may, it might come out in the news that somebody has been mobbed. I tell you that someone is mobbed for raping a child. That is the way Africa is. There's a lot of vigilantism, and this is what our law enforcement has to take care of. But when it comes to the LGBT people, they do belong to families, and I think that just out of respect for the families, it's just best you let the families love them and deal with these issues as family issues. But as far as the tendencies are concerned, we are very opposed to it as cultures.
Briefly, I've interviewed Bishop Oliver Dime from the northeast part, so many parishes have been destroyed by Muslim terrorism called Boko Haram there, homegrown radical Islamist terror. In your work with other pro-life leaders in Africa, is there any alliance between your work and Muslim groups, or is that another kind of separation of oil and water? Is there any kind of alliance in the fight for life?
Actually in Nigeria, we are 50% Muslim, 50% Christian. So we've kind of had this relationship with the Muslims that has been, sort of mutually respectful. We are a half Muslim country, and then that means that some of the holidays we have to observe it because we don't go to work on some of the Eids, but they too do not go to work on our Christian holidays, on Christmas, even Good Friday, Easter Monday. So they have to also observe some of our Christian holidays. In any case, as far as the life issues are concerned, we do get some help on the issues that they agree with us. So if it has to do with polygamy, they protect polygamy because a lot of the Nigerian Muslims are actually polygamous. But then when it has to do with something like contraception, we get a lot of help from them because they do not want that kind of Western influence when you're trying to bring in something like contraception. They love their big families. So we get a lot of help from them, even sometimes better than the Christian leaders. So in the Senate, for example, if I was going to approach someone in the Senate, if someone is trying to bring contraceptives into school, I will first of all approach a Muslim senator.
Right. Sure.
Because they're very kind of, they're very bold, when it comes to bringing the issues and defending issues.
Right.
But sometimes some of our Christian politicians, not all of them, but some of them, they just abandon you half the way there. But when it comes to abortion as well, we get some help, but not as groups. I've tried to reach out before to form one, which is the Federation of Muslim Women in Nigeria. And we just could not, because they get a lot of funding from USAID, and they just wouldn't accept some of the things I was telling them. But I have worked in the past with a lot of Muslim leaders in different countries, not just Nigeria, but in different African countries where there are large Muslim populations. Our former ambassador at the United Nations, the deputy ambassador was a Muslim. He has now left, Ambassador Usman Sadiki, and he was very good to me all the time. He was always also very outspoken on, LGBT issues that have to do with abortion, contraception, comprehensive sexuality education. And so I've had some help from them. And
those things are seen by Muslims there, it sounds like tentacles of the great Satan. In other words, foreign to the African mindset, not something that's going to be naturally welcomed. Exactly. They take it as intrusive. So intrusive, right.
They don't like that. So we can work on those issues, not all the issues, but on those issues. They're always willing to fight if they know and understand what it is and how it will impact their family life, or how it will affect their children, or if they knew their children were being targeted by some of these, NGO programs. So I do work with them on those issues sometimes, yes.
Last question. You are producing a documentary. Yes. American cinematography and high production values. Yeah. You told me off the air that you don't have a working title yet, but what's the premise? What's the heart of it, and how can people support it?
Right. Yeah, so this documentary is really close to my heart because it's going to be a series of interviews, actually several interviews that I've had in different parts of Africa. What had happened initially was that, of course, with the Mexico City policy being reinstated by President Donald Trump, the removal of funding for abortion organizations, a lot of Western organizations as well as Western leaders came in to bring more money. So since then, that's been since January this year, there has been an onslaught, it's kind of revived them. They've decided that their resistance must be bringing abortion to Africa. So I decided to make a documentary. So I went out to African countries. I sat with some women who had abortions, and they told me about their post-abortion experiences, their traumatic experiences. Some of them were also directly affected because they got abortions in organizations that were being funded by Western countries. So these women were suffering not only the abortion, but they were suffering because someone in Canada gave money to someone, some Western organization, and then they came in and had these abortions and killed their babies. So these women talked about it. There were also women who had contraceptives that were put into them. These are rural women. And this part of the documentary, I actually got the footage from Human Life International because they had gone out in parts of Uganda, and they got videos from these women poor women, the most poor women you could think about. And the contraceptives then all of a sudden started giving them side effects that no one told them about. So some of them, just had their lives completely devastated, and no one cares about them. So I'm just going to put everything together in this one documentary to show, to give a voice to these women who no one is listening to, and to show exactly how money that leaves the parliament or the House of Congress, like in a place like America, how it ends up in Africa and what it actually does in the individual lives of women.
Well, I hope Melinda Gates accepts your kind invitation to be an interview subject. That would be great, wouldn't it?
I would love that.
Well, your lips to God's ears. I hope it goes well. I want to send people there. It's cultureoflifeafrica.com. You can find out about the crowdfunding campaign and news as we go forward of her new book published by Ignatius Press coming out next year. 2 more chapters to go before the finish line. And I would be honored to if I can help get eyeballs, hearts, and minds in front of that book. Uju, let me know. Always a delight to talk to you. I always learn a ton, and it's an honor. Let's do it again sometime.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, Patrick. I'm grateful to be on your show.
Okay, we'll talk to you later. Again, it is cultureoflifeafrica.com. Godspeed, Uju.
Thank you, Patrick.
This is The Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?